Priesthood Dispatches.
He's the man. It's awesome, funny, random, doesn't make any sense, but it's good.
Hello world and welcome back to the channel. This evening there is a trigger warning. We will be talking about all things bush hidden. We're going to be talking about just galactic planetary consequences of the first bit of the temple ceremony, and we will be doing that with a few friends. Let us bring those in now. We have Adam and Eve all the way from the south of England. Oh, baby.
Hello. That's good.
And we have Adam and Eve number 2 from the Midlands.
Hello.
Hey, guys. This evening we're going to be using well-placed foliage in ancient honor of the church's videos, and as I assume, the same way that they used to do it for Joseph. Maybe this is how he met many of his wives. You know, someone slipped the foliage and he was like, give me a piece of that. Okay, right then. Everyone's in a good mood. This evening, we find ourselves in our epic, just scrolling through slides, Death by a PowerPoint, which is coming up. We find ourselves in our epic series of the Mormon Temple expose on number 4, where we will be looking at the creation room, but also the Eden room. I made a bit of a mistake there because when I went through the temple, it was just all one room. But apparently in the better temples, they get 2 separate rooms. So, yeah.
Okay.
So, real treat for you guys tonight. Not only are we all Adam and Eve in it, we've all been out in the garden, grown plants, and now we're going to tell you why. So we'd love it if everyone could like and subscribe. 300 likes is the target. Yeah, if you feel you can, that'd be cracking. So the first one, I thought we've spoken a lot about changes, temple changes, and what's happened and why it's happened. And there were some more changes in 2019 when they went from video to PowerPoint and got rid of a few other things like Satan's dress, apron. But they put like a thing on the front to say why, which I thought was amazing. Would anyone in true Sunday school style love to read from Brothers and Sisters? Thank you, Laura.
Brothers and sisters, since the temple endowment was first administered in this dispensation, occasional adjustments have been made by the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, acting unitedly in their capacity as prophets, seers, and revelators. Upon seeking the will of the Lord, and after solemn prayer in the upper room of the Salt Lake Temple, the Lord has again revealed inspired adjustments to the temple ceremonies. Shall I carry on?
Yeah, go for it.
These adjustments, which you will notice during your worship experience in the temple today, will bring harmony to the way men and women make covenants with God. They deepen our understanding of his will and his relationship with his daughters and sons. These modifications do not affect the sacred and eternal covenants associated with the saving and exalting ordinances of the temple. As a reminder, due to the sacred nature of all temple ordinances, the fact and content of these changes should not be discussed outside the temple.
So we know there's been changes all along the way, and I think at this point they got wise to people saying that they were gaslighting. So they put this on the front. It played on the front of the endowment session for a while. And what I thought was interesting, that they've even put it in bold: these modifications do not affect the sacred and eternal covenants associated with the saving and exalting ordinances of the temple. Now, I'll say that maybe it doesn't affect the very kind of end result of exaltation, but I think with the covenants in between, when it comes to the sisters pledging their allegiance to their husbands no longer, and no longer having the death oaths and things like this, do you think it makes a difference to the covenant?
I think it's really interesting. I haven't seen this before. I haven't been to the temple since 2019, so I haven't experienced this. But I had read this, I think, and seen it. And there's a couple of things I think that are really interesting on here. One is the fact that it says here about I can't see it now because of the
sorry,
that's
bro.
on there. So it says these adjustments which you will notice during your worship experience in the temple today will bring harmony to the way men and women make covenants with God. Now, just for those people that maybe haven't been to the temple that might be watching this, what that's referring to is, and please jump in and correct me if I'm getting the wording wrong or anything, but previously the men in the endowment would covenant to obey the law of God, and the women would covenant to hearken unto their husband as they hearken unto the Lord. So the men are making a covenant directly with God. The women are making a covenant to listen to the word of the Lord, but through their husband. Their husband was kind of an intermediary between them and God. And obviously that's wrong. You know, that's really problematic, and it's brilliant that it's been changed. But the wording that they use here says it will bring harmony to the way men and women make covenants. So it's acknowledging that there was disharmony before, and now we're going to kind of put them on an equal footing. But then says they deepen our understanding of His will and His relationship with His daughters and sons. They don't do is say, yeah, we've adjusted this to make it a little bit less sexist, you know, because we know that in the past it was a little bit misogynistic. Well, it was a big bit misogynistic. So we've changed it to bring it more into harmony with what we now know to be right. You know, it's just it's a typical example again of how the church doesn't give apologies. It doesn't acknowledge its mistakes, you know, and I think we can be very forgiving of these kind of mistakes. You know, we can accept that the people that produce these things are a product of their times. But that doesn't get them off the hook. You know, that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be an acknowledgement of that. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be saying, well, look, we're correcting something that was previously wrong. You know, and that, I've not noticed that before. And I think that's really problematic.
Yeah. And I spoke to a former temple president, and I asked him about the death oaths and the fact that because I hadn't done them, was I still held accountable to them, even though I hadn't? Like, were people who did it pre-1990, were they going to have to do that? Were they held accountable to that? Or were we all just the same still? Because for me, if they have to do those things, if they reveal it, but I don't because I didn't say those words, then that's a different covenant. It's a different promise, isn't it? But the church apparently would say, no, it's the same. And it doesn't matter that you didn't do it. You're still both held to the same kind of bar. And I'd say that that's the same with the sisters here. And they've even said his relationship with his daughters and sons, which is loaded language. And I'm all for, you know, equal rights for men and women and men. But the church has
started. You, PD.
Yeah. Oh God, get me bra right. But the church has started doing this, putting sisters first, daughters first, which I think is Madam Protesta too much, if you know what I mean. It's too obvious that they've made this change in language in order to appease some of the sisters who want to feel more included. You know, what they could do is they could just say, oh yeah, sisters have the priesthood. We're all just the same. Everyone has the same covenants. Everyone has the same responsibilities. Let's get on with it. Whereas they just change these little words around and expect everyone to kind of, oh, look what they did. No. Sorry, I'm on one tonight. I think it's the foliage.
I do agree.
I'm on one with you. I think this change was, and how they announced it and what the changes were and how they gave no explanation ever of what these changes even mean ever. They've given no secret explanation, no public explanation. They just made the changes, told everyone suck it up. I think this is the point where their constant tinkering with the endowment just collapsed into absolute farce, because, as you said, it acknowledged that something was wrong before. And it is a radical change. This is one of the covenants that's to do with accessing exaltation and salvation. You know, the wording of the covenant that the women used to make their covenant to their husbands, who presumably in the next life would be their gods, like who they would worship and who would kind of give them exaltation, which I'm really up for.
Oh,
And they
Pete-
just changed that, but it's a different covenant, you know. If or is it? We may be getting a bit ahead of ourselves, but
You
if we're
are,
sort of
you are.
discussing what that particular, we'll
Yeah.
get to it a bit later. Make sure we do, because they sort of, the way they worded the new version actually doesn't change anything and might even be more polygamous than before.
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to point out from this announcement, they said these modifications do not affect the sacred and eternal covenants associated with the saving and exalting ordinances of the temple. Well, they do. They completely change some of them. As a reminder, due to the sacred nature of all temple ordinances, the fact and content of these changes should not be discussed outside the temple. So it's not only should you not say what has changed, you shouldn't even admit outside of the temple that there has been a change. Now, that for me was the most sinister line I've ever heard in a lot of sinister lines from leaders of our church. And they had this read at the beginning of the endowment for months. It's, you're not even allowed to admit that we changed anything. You can't talk about the fact that we changed anything outside the temple. And as we know, inside the temple, you're mostly shushed and you're not allowed to sit around having a chat about what the hell just happened. This was like the most assertive example the leaders of the church have ever done of totalitarian thought control. You weren't even allowed to acknowledge that any changes had happened. Like, if someone asked you, you would just have to lie to them. And as usual, it was total hypocrisy because they did a press release about it. The
But
church spoke to the press, or they had some kind of public statement acknowledging that changes had been made. But in the temple itself, they're telling the peasant slaves of the church, you're not even allowed to admit that there was a change, even though we will tell journalists. I need some fruit to calm me down.
okay, Laura.
I mean, it was just egregious. Over to Laura.
No, I think I too have noticed the rhetoric where you've got sisters and coming first, sisters and brothers and daughters and sons, and maybe that's a way for them to acknowledge disharmony, if that's the way they want to put it. Maybe that's like it does come at a risk, I think, because I think if you've got a stalwart priesthood holder, that will antagonize. So they have made a decision there to, I think, I do think it's risky to use that sort of language, because I think maybe some of the this is not to do a disservice to the older sisters, just because they've been a bit more entrenched in it for longer. They will probably see it as a nice gesture. The younger lot, I don't think will be near as placated. But aside from that, I just wanted to go back to these adjustments, which you will notice during your worship experience in the temple today. That to me is sinister. These adjustments, which you will notice during your worship experience in the temple today, will bring harmony to the way men and women make covenants with God. So if anybody goes and experiences that and thinks, hang on, I have a bunch of questions here as to why it wasn't harmonious beforehand, but actually my temple experience today has to be about harmony. I have to be feeling good about this experience. Again, it's this whole thing of, I'm going to give you groupthink and no space to process that.
Yeah, I agree. I think you mentioned a press release, Peter. I don't know about a press release, but I know that something very similar to what we've got here was released, because I remember reading this whole thing about the fact that it shouldn't be discussed outside of the temple. And I'm sure we must have touched upon this in some of the other podcasts that we've done in this series. But there is a lot of, I think that there's a bit of controversy about what you can and can't say outside of the temple. Now, for me, I always thought it was very, very clear, because there are certain things in the temple that we make covenants not to reveal. So as far as I'm concerned, that's the bit that we're not allowed to talk about. The rest, that's absolutely fine. We're okay to talk about those things. So this was bringing in a new level, wasn't it? When they said this shouldn't be discussed, it's bringing in a new level. And yet they've acknowledged the changes. So I think the real point here, I'm trying to work out why they've done this. And I imagine it's because they don't want people to know that it was ever any different. They want to make the change, and they want to forget about how it was. We're all going to know that it's changed, and they're acknowledging that it's changed, but they don't want to acknowledge what it's changed from.
Yeah, I kind of think that some feedback. It comes from there was a previous change a couple of years before where they made some big changes on like the 1st of January. I can't remember which year it was. And that was when they did all the stuff with the sisters no longer having to veil their faces, and the sisters no longer covenanting to follow their husband as Lord and Savior. And those changes were like online the day of, people blabbed it far and wide. And I think that's the problem that they're trying to address here. The fact that, reminding everyone that it's not to be discussed outside the temple, but let's do it anyway, shall we? So we've done the washings and anointings. We're all very well greased and oiled up. I just wanted to point this one out. So we get to the endowment, I guess, part that we would more recognize as the endowment ceremony. And it wasn't until 1877 that endowments were actually starting to be done for dead ancestors. So previous to that, it was all very, as Keith Erickson would say, it was all very horizontal. Everyone being sealed together as brothers and sisters. And then it was changed by Wilford Woodruff to be more vertical, and everyone being sealed to their dead ancestors. Julian, you look like you've got something to say. Okay.
I've just messing around in my mouth. I've got a little ulcer.
All right, everyone loved hearing that. So after your washing and anointing, you get a present, and that is a new name. And to point out, also in Freemasonry from the 1820s, a new initiate also gets a new name. Just down here. I also present you with a new name. It is Caution. Now, I don't know if the name is Caution or if that's like Caution, don't tell anyone your new name. But yeah, Freemasons got a new name as well. So it only kind of goes to show another parallel between, and we'll see some more parallels later, between the Masonic ritual and the Mormon ritual. But does anyone want to explain this list of names here? Peter, you're muted.
Sorry, my Eve left me. I think she's Judith. Like, there's this legend that Adam in the Garden of Eden had a first wife called Judith.
No, isn't it Lilith?
She wasn't playing ball with this. Oh, Lilith. Sorry,
Yeah.
Lilith. And that she wasn't gonna, play ball with that nonsense and left. So that's how we ended up with Eve. Anyway, the chair was getting uncomfortable. She might be back later. She's off looking for more fruit. So the new names, I don't know, when you go through, you kind of think, oh, this is some mystical, amazing, special thing just for me. But then you find out there's a calendar. So the new name you get is based upon the whoever went through the temple that day in all the temples of the world.
Yeah.
So, which is quite a good idea, because if you do forget your very important new name, you can always check out the date you went to the temple, and someone can let you know which one you got.
Yeah.
It's kind of a list of I think they're all from the scriptures. I don't know.
But this current one here, if you were to go through
think-
the temple today, your new name as a female would be Rhoda. I've never heard of Rhoda.
It's very difficult to have that many names for females, considering there's not that many females in the scriptures.
Yeah.
You have to include a few harlots.
Norma.
Not many from the Book of Mormon.
Donna.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you were a woman, you'd be Rhoda. If you were a man, you would be Ishmael.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's the oracle, the temple oracle, they call it, temple name oracle. So anyone can, as Peter said, give their date that they went through, and the church can look back and remind you of your new name. And
so can I just point out what Ruth has, that comment from Ruth. So she's saying her new name was Eve. So that must mean, I think I'm right in saying that must mean that the actual name was Ruth. So if you go through and it just so happens that the new name for that day is your actual name, then they give you Adam or Eve. Is that right?
yes.
Oh, okay.
So she will have gone through, if it was after January 22nd, 1993, Ruth will have gone through on the 1st of the month. So it's like one of them social media things where you're like, oh, tell me your sex name, where actually it's a code for your date of birth. And people they put black hanging canvas or something, and they figure out your date of birth because you've done it from the little
fishing for your data.
Little oracle there. But there was, so last week we read from a very angry ex-Mormon who was from England and moved across to Utah in the 1850s, and he went through the temple, and we've got a couple of interesting excerpts from him today. Later on, he meets the angel Moroni in the temple, which is weird. Never heard of that one. But speaking of the new name, he says, after he was washed and anointed, the priest whispered in my ear, new name, which no man knoweth, save he that receiveth it. He first ascertained that my Christian name was William, and then gave me the name of James. All the names are either John, Peter, James, David, Solomon, Abraham, or such like, and there are no surnames given in the endowment house. This new name must never be divulged, only to St. Peter. And then he speaks about, at this juncture, I was introduced to the angel Gabriel. I shook hands accordingly with this angel majesty, but being unaccustomed to meeting angels, I was somewhat embarrassed and knew not what to say. However, I summoned up my courage to remark, happy to meet you, Mr. Gabriel. It's a fine day, ain't it? Forgetting that angels usually live so far from the clouds that they are unaffected by atmospheric influences. I also ventured to say that I had expected to have heard him blow his trumpet before having the pleasure of his acquaintance. He smiled, and this relieved me, for I expected to find angels very grave and solemn. But here was an angel that could actually laugh. And he goes on about drawing him out, about talking about the resurrection and different things. But I'd like to believe him that there was some entertainer whilst everyone else was getting washed and anointed, because if there's 60 of you going through and you've all got to have a bath and a rub down, it's going to take some time. I'd like to think that there was a man stood in the other room with a trumpet, just waiting for people to be like, hey, how you doing? Like a stand-up comic.
Or maybe he was introducing them. When you kind of enter
herald.
the room, like, doo-doo-doo-doo.
Yes.
Here comes Eve.
Is Master James, come on down. Yeah. But we hear more from Angel Moroni later. But I just thought that was awesome.
PD, could I just say something before we move on? Just on the whole new name thing. So I've just kind of had a quick little glance down at the comments, and Ruth kind of started off this whole thing now, and people are kind of putting their names on there. And I understand that that some people that might be watching, because I know that you get quite a lot of active members that come on to view the channel
They're gonna love this.
might be a bit upset by that, and even, you know, I'm being a bit facetious there, but even some people that have left might be a bit upset. I'm going to be honest with you. It took me ages to be able to even tell Laura my new name. Even after I'd left, I didn't believe it. But, you know, it's just difficult, because I promised I wouldn't. I found it really hard.
Yeah.
You know, I don't mind saying it now. It's Malcolm.
Ooh.
But I know that some people are not going to kind of understand the fact that actually being able to, you know, for some, being able to kind of now talk about it and express it on the internet is important for them. It's an important part of kind of taking ownership again, an important part of processing what for some people...
like a reclamation, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I feel like I'm very fortunate in that I quite enjoyed the temple. It didn't really affect me in the same way as I know it does a lot of people. And so being able to talk openly and frankly in this way, to, you know, and doing things like sharing their new name, that's quite an important thing for some people. And so if anybody is watching this and is upset, they're probably not. But if they are, then just be kind and generous and realise that actually some people have been massively traumatised by the temple, and it's important for them to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're here for. We're here to take things a little less seriously, but we have, as a group of people, decided on certain lines that we've said we won't cross, and we won't, you know, be giving away signs and tokens that people who may watch feel very uncomfortable with. So yeah, I think that's well worth pointing out there, Julian. It was ruined for me a little bit on the day that I went through the temple, and you know how they kind of get your whole family to go through the veil first and wait in the celestial room to kind of welcome you as you go through. My whole family were there. My brother-in-law, who wasn't my brother-in-law at the time, he greeted me and whispered in my ear, "I know your name." And I was like, I've just gone through that whole thing of kind of what was supposed to be the climax of my, you know, spiritual upbringing. And he sat me down and he opened the scriptures and he turned to the page where it said my new name and pointed at it. And I was just so disappointed. I thought, did he hear me at the veil? Was he like one of the workers and he overheard me? Shouldn't he have been concentrating on the other people? And it wasn't until years later that I figured out that everyone just gets the same name for the day. So yeah, names are funny things. You only ever use them when you're in trouble. But the whole point.
Should we just point out what? Should we just point out like why again for people
between you and God, you know,
we're sort of assuming like what is the name for? What is the point in the temple?
Well, that's what
there is.
That's what we're doing now,
Peter.
Peter.
The point where you what? Sorry.
That's what we're doing now on this slide.
Okay, brilliant. Go for it. Sorry.
Awesome. So, I'm sure there are other reasons for the new name, Peter, but the one that I've chosen is that we were all going to get a new name. And if you imagine, there are probably only a few hundred new names. So if there are millions and millions of people in the celestial kingdom and everyone shouts Ishmael, a lot of people are going to turn around. So I'm sure, you know, this name will be kept very sacred even then, surely. But
I mean, do you get to trade in your? So is that how the polygamy part of it works? Because it's only the men that are going to be shouting the name, aren't they? So if they shout out, I don't know, Debbie, and you've got like 20 Debbies, you're like, can you trade in your Debbie for another Debbie?
Well, we're about to see this, right? So the angel Moroni that met this English convert in the temple also goes on to say, Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in transgression. She gave away to the devil in Eden, and she had no business to. And then she coaxed and wheeled around her old man Adam until he yielded to her. He did not yield to Satan only inasmuch as the devil was in Eve. Now the woman, having given way to Satan, it will never do to entrust her with salvation. So this is how, and I'm not saying that what this guy's written is accurate to 100%, but it jives with the doctrine that the woman is put down because of Eve's transgression here. Okay. And then the fact that he says it wouldn't be right to trust her with her salvation, for she would give it away to the devil in 5 minutes. The husband holds the wife's salvation and has power to raise her up at the resurrection. Interrupting, I asked, what became of the spinsters and old maids? Gabriel laughed heartily this time and said, when they die, their spirits are shoved into prison with the spirits of all the old bachelors, and that is hell enough for both parties. The gospel of matrimony is preached unto them, and if they get over their prejudice and join in wedlock, they are let out of jail and go straight to glory. Here the angel paused and said, let me see what we had got so far as the resurrection. Now, don't you see that it's very important that a man should have power to resurrect his own wives? It will not be as you have supposed, that I shall toot my horn and wake them up. Oh no, it's not my business to wake up the women. At the resurrection, I shall only call forth the men. For instance, take your own case. Supposing you marry 40 wives, perhaps several of them will have perplexed or bothered you so much in this life that you won't want to be troubled by them in the next world. This is amazing, isn't it? No, do you think this was written by a man? No one would know better than yourself who to resurrect out of the lot. It will be my duty to call you up. There you will stand at the graves of your 40 wives, and you will then call forth those you wish. The remainder will sleep on in their graves and never see the light of eternity. No woman's name is found in the book of life. So far as I could learn from this celebrated angel, I should stand at the graves of my 40 wives, provided I had so many, and should soliloquize thus: there's Jane. She was the first-rate wife and very faithful. I'll have her up. Hence I would bawl out, Jane, come forth, and up she'd come. Well, there's Maria. She was a vixen. I had enough of her during this life. I don't want her anymore. Maria is mine. Okay, so it goes on with some interesting things, but the thing that he's getting to is that the reason for the names is, and this is found when you go and do your temple sealing to your wife. The brother will learn the wife's name, but the wife will not learn the brother's name because she doesn't need it. The brother needs it because on the morning of the first resurrection, he will be called forward if he is righteous, and he will choose to call his wife forward. Anyone?
Am I missing something? Because, okay, so I think that needs addressing, that whole thing that you've just read out there. But before I go on to that, am I missing something? Because what's wrong with your real name? You know, if I'm calling Laura up out of her grave, can't I just go, Laura? Why does it need to be Eve or whatever? I don't get that. It doesn't make any sense. It's like explained as if that explains, but that's bollocks. It doesn't make any sense.
If you've got 40 wives, you've got to remember 80 names. And if you call forth the vixen by accident, you can't put her back under again. Maybe you can, I don't know.
You're much more likely to remember their actual names that you've used for them throughout their lives. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, Erastus Snow tried to make some more sense of it. And this from a pro-Mormon point of view from the Journal of Discourses 5291. Do you uphold your husband before God as your Lord? What? My husband to be my Lord? I ask, can you get into the celestial kingdom without him? Have any of you been there? You will remember that you never got into the celestial kingdom without the aid of your husband. If you did, it was because your husband was away and someone had to act proxy for him. No woman will get into the celestial kingdom except her husband receives her if she is worthy to have a husband, and if not, somebody will receive her as a servant. So
Still doesn't explain why they need a different name.
No, I'm just kind of reinforcing the fact that what the guy said, the angel said,
But that also
not
goes
just-
back to the fact that the covenant that's been changed when it comes to obeying your husband is significant, because here it's important that it exists because your husband is your conduit to heaven. So by changing it so that you don't obey your husband, it is different because you've now got this relationship directly with God, which is too dangerous.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like the church up until the mid 2010s held the husband up as the lord of the wife. You know, he was, as it said there, the wife was never going to get to the celestial kingdom without a husband. And it's the same way that we know what the husband will do in the celestial kingdom in making worlds and everything, but we're very grainy on what the sisters will do in the celestial kingdom because it doesn't matter. They're almost an appendage to this male oriented doctrine.
No.
I feel like I need Jane to put some kind of monologue on the chat for this. I need her voice because she would go to town on this. I'm a bit flabbergasted. I've never heard of this rhetoric. I knew that the males were supposed to call forth the females, but I had no idea that there was an idea that that they might just not call ones that had peed them off.
Yeah, I've got to say, I don't think that's a very. I don't know, but I don't think that's a very reliable.
I think
In terms of doctrine is concerned,
No,
you know, on several accounts. So obviously, certainly the presentation of the Garden of Eden story is really quite. I think is quite good in that, you know, it has Eve kind of understanding what needs to happen, and Adam actually kind of saying to her, "Look, yeah, Eve, I see that this must be." You know, he kind of understands that this is what he's got to do in order to keep God's commandment to multiply and replenish the earth, and so to then cast her as the villain in the story seems to kind of go against the narrative of the endowment itself. So that I think is problematic. I think the calling them forward in the resurrection.
no,
You know,
that's the thing.
Yeah, but even that, you know, I don't know how fair it would be to say that that's doctrine. What's interesting is that you mentioned the links to Freemasonry, and that touches upon the whole resurrection thing as well. So in the if I'm remembering this right, I haven't looked at it for a long time, but in the third degree of masonry, where you become a master mason, you learn a grip, which is I think it's called like the lion's grip or something like that.
Yeah.
And this grip is used to resurrect the murdered Hiram Abiff in that story. So there is a link with these things and this idea of the kind of ritual of actually resurrecting somebody.
Yeah, it's the same grip that you take your wife by when you're sealed together.
It's very similar. There is a slight difference, but it's very, very similar.
Yeah. But I think I agree with you, Julian. This guy's story, this anti-Mormon, it's very theatrical. But I think what it is indicative of is maybe the cultural impressions at the time of polygamy. And one line further down, I think, kind of brings that to the fore when he says that the reason for this says, "You see," said the angel, continuing his strange theology, "the doctrine makes the woman obey their husbands when nothing else will. Polygamy is a peculiar affair, and it requires a strong doctrine to regulate the domestic concerns of plurality. Hence, we teach that the husband is the only Lord and God the wife will ever know or be answerable to." So I'm not saying that's accurate, but what I'm saying is there are undertones of that we've seen in the temple of the wife having to be subservient to her husband, and that way back then it was possibly a cultural thing rather than a doctrinal thing. You know how you have a seed of a doctrine when someone says something and then they pick it up and then they say, all right, well, that's the reason for polygamy, and that's the reason that the women don't need anything, because the guy's going to do it all for them.
And you've got to, I've got to say that if you've read much of the writings of Brigham Young, you can imagine this coming out of his mouth. It does sound very, very similar to a lot of the stuff, spoken by him. And that's interesting as well, isn't it? Because, again, we let's not go headfirst down this rabbit hole, but it shows the disharmony in that we would all assume is present in polygamous marriages, or certainly can be in polygamous marriages. And
certainly we're swimming in the difference between culture and what's being said from the pulpit every single day, because that's why there's such a misstep in generations. If you get a ex-Mormon that has been that has received trauma through their teachings, and they were raised, say, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, they have had a very different cultural experience to how the kids are being raised now. And so there's not that understanding of that experience, and it can feel like you're being gaslit, but that's because that was the understanding of the time. When we were raised in the 80s and 90s, we had a very different rhetoric fed to us in youth than you get now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, back then it was still, the boys are going to be doing football and the girls are going to be doing knitting or learning to sew or learning to bake, because all the girls are going to do is stay at home and raise big families. Whereas now, it's the boys still just play football, but the girls are able to actually do constructive activities and do what the boys do if they want to.
I still do see a lot of toilet roll being used for wedding dresses on mutual activities, though. Stop that!
Oh, right then,
I think that can you imagine the spectacle of this? You got William Jarman with a huge audience of Brits who know nothing about Mormonism, and he's clearly blinging things up here. I mean, I've no idea if there was ever an angel Gabriel having these conversations with people who went to the endowment. I think it was quite an immersive experience. But what he's done is he's created a kind of a foil for actually discussing what he's seeing. He has picked up on all these details, the key messages of the endowment, and he's got this idea of, he's nailing straight in on the misogyny of it all, the enslavement of women, the control, the patriarchal nonsense, and he's really expressing that really powerfully.
Hey everyone, SEMC screwing with us again.
Doctrine.
Yeah, so I think
it was Christian doctrine that Eve screwed up everything for all of humanity. So that's what he's kind of picking up here and what these other apostles are. But as we've also commented, aspects of the Mormon temple focus are actually very feminist. Eve kind of knew what she was doing and did positive things rather than being a mess. So you've got this tension playing out between traditional Christian views of women because of Eve as the weak person screwing everything up for men. Therefore, she cannot be trusted with political power. Women cannot have the votes. Women cannot make decisions about the family. Women cannot have status or priesthood. Yet they've kind of had dropped in their laps, and it's in Genesis to some extent, this much more feminist view of Eve, that she got them out of being stuck. I mean, this is a really positive thing about the endowment.
Peter, I always thought that Eve didn't do anything wrong. Eve was the one that figured it out first, and that Adam was
definitely
behind, because
it's a clear message.
We'll get to that. So one last one before we get into the actual nuts and bolts of it. Death by a PowerPoint. Obviously, that's what our broadcasts are, but we do it for fun. But they're death by PowerPoint. So from Utah Lighthouse Ministry on the right-hand side here, Peter, could you read till I stop you, please?
Oh, good Lord, I'll try. It's very small. Right. Originally, the endowment ceremony was a live play, but in the 1970s, the LDS Church began to incorporate filmed portions. Currently, only Salt Lake and Manti temples perform the story of Adam and Eve live, but these temples are scheduled to close at the end of 2019 for remodeling. However, one wonders if they will continue to present the live drama when the two temples reopen in a few years. In 2013 and 2014, the LDS Church introduced 3 new temple films. Each of the films used the same dialogue but had different actions, thus providing a little variety as the films were rotated in use. Actors are seen playing the parts of Elohim, Jehovah, and Michael, communicating with Lucifer, Adam, and Eve. It also showed Peter, James, and John conversing with the various characters in the creation play. However, this year the films have been eliminated. Now they only use slides depicting various scenes from the play while the audience listens to a recording of the actors' voices. After going to each After going to such expense to create and translate these new films, why revert to slides? Sorry, my eyes have gone. It's really tiny on
I'll
the
read the
screen.
last paragraph.
Someone else wants to carry on reading. Thank you.
One possible answer would be that it simplifies the task when making adjustments to the ceremony. A new version of the video would need to be made. Also, it would be easier to adjust the length of the ritual when a translation into foreign language takes longer than in English. Some have speculated the removal of the films might be to distance the church from the producer of the videos, who recently pled guilty to sex crimes. But I thought that was a nice, concise kind of way of showing how it was before. Obviously, a live play until the 1970s, and then beyond. So
this, I mean, the fact that they've gone, what's actually happened to Salt Lake, I don't know if you're going to talk about that later or if we should say that now.
go for it, Peter.
It's kind of spot on for what we're talking about, how you can make changes in this church if you campaign and things like that, but also how too much power is concentrated at the top. President Nelson and a bunch of officials gave an official press conference describing the plans for the Salt Lake Temple, that they're going to make it earthquake proof and renovate it, and they've got a major overhaul going on. They lined up people saying, we have spent literally years researching conservation, that we are going to preserve this temple for future generations. The Salt Lake Temple being the iconic, the Vatican, the Sistine Chapel of Mormonism, with craftsmanship and murals painted on the walls. They sent missionaries to Europe in the 1800s to study art in Paris and bring home those skills and paint these priceless murals. And they made promises that they were researching mural conservation, that, you know, everything would be restored as it should be. They bring back the multicolored palette of the original Victorian artists who made it. So it was about a restoration to how Brigham Young had that building. And they said that they would be continuing live endowments, alternating with filmed ones. Basically, the idea being just introduce a screen that can kind of come down from the ceiling, so foreign visitors can do it in their own languages if they want to. Once they'd made all that press announcement, cleared all the temple workers, got everyone off site, they destroyed it. They suddenly had different ideas. Suddenly, oh, we can't save anything. So as far as we know, the only things being saved from the original craftsmanship are some stairways. As far as we understand, all these murals that you're looking at have now been destroyed. They are changing the sizes of the rooms. They're going to turn it into a Mac temple with films in boxes rather than progressing through the rooms, one presumes, or maybe a halfway house. And they've now announced that they are no longer going to be doing any live endowments anywhere. So after promising in a press conference with President Nelson there that the live endowments would continue, they've announced that they are now discontinued at Manti and Salt Lake. There was a slightly more successful outcome with Manti. They were planning to do the same to Manti. Manti Temple has murals painted by Minerva Teichart, who is like the female Mormon artist of the 20th century. Priceless as far as Mormon art history goes. And there was a huge campaign and a lot of distress about this. And they were going to have protests in Provo. There was a whole movement going to campaign to preserve this art of this female artist rather than erase it from history. And there was such a backlash about this that President Nelson had a revelation. It was remarkable. And the revelation was, we're now going to build a small temple, just up the road from Manti to cope with the huge demands, which is all imaginary. There isn't huge demands. And the Manti Temple is basically going to be left alone with some renovation. So the murals at the moment, the plan is to preserve them as they should be, where they were made to be originally. And the lies they've told is just astonishing. Oh, we found it was too difficult to get these murals off the wall and that sort of thing and preserve them. All utter nonsense. The world is teeming with art restoration and conservation experts
I
who
was going to
keep building
say,
thousands of years older than this going.
yeah, go around Europe.
So it's
Any old building in Europe, and there are preserved artwork from far older than this. From hundreds and hundreds of years.
I mean,
ago.
This, because I'm an art teacher, this absolutely tipped me over the edge. This is my trigger thing where I was ready for the church to burn down, because the utter the contempt towards this church that goes on and indoctrinated me from childhood in England about the pioneer heritage, how this is our shared culture and history. We are those pioneers. They traveled across hell and deserts and lost their children and suffered to build this temple in Salt Lake City and that temple Manti and St. George and Logan, and they already destroyed Logan in the 70s. And they to just stand there, make solemn vows as the prophet of the church that it was all going to be preserved, and then to just with utter contempt be like, gotcha. If this happened in Britain, in a parish church, anywhere, there would be campaigns, people would be chaining themselves to the bulldozers to stop the destruction. I'm disgusted with the utter lack of civic something or other of the people of Salt Lake City, that they are watching this happen. Their number one tourist attraction, their most precious jewel, they are letting it happen, and they've done nothing to stop it, really. This would not happen in Britain because we're much more clued into having heritage to preserve. And I think Americans are just used to having so little old buildings to look after. They don't kind of have a feel for it. Is my only explanation for why there haven't been people chaining themselves across the gateways to Temple Square to stop this happening. It's and it maybe when it opens, they'll see how much they've messed it up. Then the protests will start, but it'll be too late.
Is this an expensive endeavour to restore the artwork here? Are we talking a lot of money?
Well, yeah, but do you think money's no object?
They've got it.
No, I'm saying, is this a reason?
They've got billions. Yeah.
I don't think it is. I think the only possible reasons can be Russell M. Nelson likes white, pure temples, the new ones where it's just white inside. For me, when I first went somewhere that had a different color paint on the wall to that white magnolia, I was shocked and I felt it was a bit irreverent, But for these ones in Salt Lake, I've heard people talk about how their great-grandfather painted that, or their great-grandfather worked on the balustrades, or their great-grandfather did this, that, and the other, or their great-grandmother, sewed the veil and different things. And when they went to the temple, they felt that connection with their ancestors, and it gave that extra dimension to the temple. But I think this is just the classic thing that Julian's already spoken about, and that is the dumbing down, taking away all the interesting things. What do you think, Julian?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I don't want to cover old ground, but this is exactly what I was talking about last time. You know, they're completely missing the point. You know, it should be entertaining. It's supposed to be an enriching and entertaining experience. And, you know, all they're trying to do is distill it to, you know, these essential elements, which themselves have been kind of distilled and reduced down and can change, as we've discussed with covenants that are made. Then for goodness sake, just spare us all the bother. Let's stop wasting money and just, you know, Prophet can just do it for and in behalf of everyone that's died
Yeah.
and will die and all of that, you know, because that's what the atonement was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In the atonement, you didn't have to do it every time for each individual person. You know, surely the atonement is good enough to just take care of all of this stuff as well, if it's an essential ordinance. If that's what you want, if all you're trying to do is distill it down to this idea of no, we are saving our ancestors, then it's just nonsense. And anybody that tries to apply the least bit of logical thinking to it can see that it is nonsense. The atonement, if you believe in the atonement, is enough to save everybody to the ultimate, you know, amount, the required amount. It's not designed for our ancestors. It is an endowment of power for the individual that is going through, or that's what it's meant to be. And I would suggest, you know, could be, if they were putting their attention into actually making an enjoyable experience for people, something that people felt a real desire to go, not because God is going to bless them or they'll get some brownie points or their ancestors all, you know, bow down at them or anything, but actually just I'm coming and I'm having this wonderful experience being here. Then I think they could make it a good experience again. But it just shows, for me, I just hear all that stuff that you was going on about Peter, and it just says, well, they don't give a crap. They don't care. It's not about. Did we think it was about us? It's not about us. They don't care.
President Nelson's also randomly decided they're going to put a second baptistry in. And the whole thing is his personal delusion that the church is growing exponentially and there's huge demand for this. The Manti and Salt Lake temples were not oversubscribed. They were not too busy. They had low periods, you know. He thinks it's just going to be this machine with multitudes of nations and languages coming to the temple. They could have done both. All they need to do is put a screen in the same room, just have it lower from the ceiling and do a different schedule, have people sit there.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no need to do any of this. But he has, of course, had his own tombstone swapped for a slab of the granite taken from the Salt Lake Temple he is vandalizing.
Yeah.
With his name on it.
I think that was the whole reason.
So it faces the road. So the tombstone is now facing where it's easier to read from the street to show off.
Yeah.
And it has a little comment that this is the president of the church who renovated the Salt Lake Temple.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's like the Romans taking the menorah and the Ark of the Covenant out of the Jewish temple they destroyed and featuring it on the Arch of Titus in Rome, which I've gone to see in the Roman Forum. You can see them carrying the Ark of the Covenant in triumph and the menorah with the candlesticks, you know, and it's there. And I'm like, I can't believe this is literally happening in front of our faces with President Nelson in Salt Lake City. He's destroyed the temple, raided it of trophies, and he's claiming a glorious victory. And he's a barbarian invader. He's destroyed our Sistine Chapel. It's unforgivable.
Well, let's get to the creation room because we need to move on swiftly. Otherwise, we are the creation room, or as written here in the 1931 Temple Mormonism, it's evolution, ritual, and meaning. They call it here the door of chaos, or the creation room, or further down, it's called Okay, I can't find it. It's
Chaos or the lower instruction room.
That's it, chaos or the lower instruction room. So that was new to me. But in this creation room, everyone goes in, the men sit on the right, the ladies sit on the left. This here on the left-hand side, this slightly blurred image, this is from the 1906 Salt Lake Tribune. We've seen some excerpts from this previously in previous episodes. So this is just a continuation of their account. And they say in the creation room, at length the silence is broken and a man enters a door in the front of the room dressed in white and representing Elohim. Now, this was new to me. The greatest of the Mormon deities, he makes the statement that any who wish to retire may do so, that everything which is heard and seen is to be kept profoundly secret, that which he has been already passed through, as well as that which is to come. Seeing none who wish to retire, he continues, brethren, you have been washed clean. You have been washed and pronounced clean. That is clean from the bloods and sins of this generation. He goes on. Now, when you're in the temple and you hear that voice for the first time, I never connected that was supposed to be Elohim. Did anyone else?
No.
And to me, that was
An
possibly
instructional voice. Yeah, I don't know.
news. I thought it was just the guy.
Just some random bloke explaining what's going on, I thought.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but at least according to this account.
No,
Interesting.
I noticed. There are two. I think I'm right in saying that if you listen to those kind of instructional voices, there are two, and at some points it's Elohim, and at other points it's Peter.
Yeah, because doesn't he refer to himself in the third person at one point when he says that he won't be mocked? So I thought that that was somebody else speaking.
Yeah, it says, "For God will not be mocked." Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in this account from 1931, when all is quiet, a man dressed in white, representing Elohim, comes from behind the curtain and addressing the audience and says, "Brethren, you have been washed and pronounced clean," and gives that speech to back up, I guess, slightly what we were discussing earlier about the sexism. Sisters, you have been washed and anointed that you may become queens and priestesses unto your lords, that is your husbands. So I guess that kind of jibes with what we read earlier of the husbands being represented as the Lord to the sister, whereas that's obviously changed now.
Mm-hmm.
So in the creation room, they speak about being washed and anointed, and then they go on to speak about the actual creation of the earth, this being the image we saw a moment ago of those lovely murals, or one of those lovely murals in the Salt Lake Temple creation room. And the reason for them was to set the scene, because it was a live action role play. So, that's special. 3 voices heard. So here we have a scene with Elohim, Jehovah, and Michael, and it's the creation scene. This image on the right-hand side is one of the latest images from the James Webb Telescope, and shows the universe looking back 13 billion light years, which is an amazing image. And some of the imagery shown in the temple is similar, showing shots from of the cosmos and different things as planets start to be formed. And I thought this was always just amazing, because I was always into this stuff, and it really kind of ticked a box for me, because it helped me understand kind of how it all fit together and the whole matter unorganized. So at this point in the ceremony, you've got Elohim who remains in heaven, and then Michael and Jehovah go down and organize the earth from matter unorganized, and thus announce the trash planet paradox, which I'm about to drag you guys through. But they go through basically the 7 days of creation as found in Genesis. Okay. But there's a paradox here which I think doesn't get discussed enough. And that paradox is, the first part is that the Mormon creation is a young earth creation. Okay, we know from the Doctrine and Covenants, section 77.6 here, the question, what are we to understand by the book in John saw, which was sealed on the back of the 7 seals. And Joseph Smith goes on to say that the temporal existence of the earth is 7,000 years. And we see that the benefits of the fall from just below there, from the church's website, say that there was no death in the world, for going the right direction, no death in the world, no mortality, spiritual or physical death, previous to 6,000 years ago, which was the fall of Adam and Eve. And we see in Second Nephi it speaks about that as well. And then from 2017 LDS Bible Dictionary, topic death, latter day revelation teaches there was no death on this earth before the fall of Adam. Indeed, death entered the world as a direct result of the fall, which makes sense for the story of the creation. Okay. But that raises a question that was always a big question for me. What then do we do with evidence of pre-Adamite animals, plant life, humans that is dated to be older than 6,000 years old? Has anyone, I guess, there's a stereotypical kind of question or answer that people come back to me with, but what answers have you guys heard?
Oh, I got taught it. Yeah, we had a guy who was brilliant at channeling all the speculative stuff, which made growing up with around these people in the 780s a hoot. And Mormonism was much more interesting back then when it was weirder. And that is that these fossils are the remnants from other worlds. So
Yeah.
God has recycled bits of other planets. So the fossils come from those other worlds in the ancient past. And that's why we're finding fossils. And then you get nutty evangelical Christians who take it even further, that the fossils are put there by Satan to kind of trick us and divert us with this whole evolution thing from believing the truth. So yeah, I actually definitely for certain got taught that as an explanation as I was growing up.
Yeah. So and this is the paradox, because we've now come to the point where there are supposedly bits of other planets floating around that have previous human life on them, just floating around in space as matter unorganized, and that is the matter unorganized. Now, I could understand if it was just meteorites and dust, that's matter unorganized for me, and that's what I went with, and that created the Earth, and that fit with some of science. But then when people gave me this answer, they would say that on those bits of rock in space were cave paintings from that can be dated to 10,000 years ago, or footprints, ancient footprints from mudbeds or walls. Go on.
But our theology does account for that, doesn't it? Because, you know, if we're doing what has been done in other worlds, you can say, well, this has happened elsewhere, and that's gone through its life cycle, and now we've got a little bit of a piece of that other world.
Yes, but it's the life cycle that is the problem, because the life cycle of a planet, if it is being done as was in other worlds, what happens to this world after the second coming? And that is, from the church's website, the planet on which we live, created by God through Jesus Christ to be used by man during his mortal probation. Its final destiny is to become glorified and exalted. The earth will become an eternal inheritance for those who lived worthy of the celestial glory. They will enjoy the presence of the Father and of the Son. So it is not to be broken up and used to create.
You've done this before, PD.
No, this is, people don't talk about this enough.
No, they don't.
This is
I hadn't heard
head.
He's taken it literally.
I
think it's such a thing in Mormonism that where people come up with these solutions. I mean, again, particularly in what we call McConkie Mormonism, where everything was pinned down, everything any prophet ever said had to be true. And people would wade through the journals of discourses, all these records of pretty much every talk loads of 1800s apostles had given often contradicting each other, and they try and make it work. And I think part of the genius of Mormonism that Joseph Smith demonstrated himself is that he sees the gaps. He sees where something didn't work in traditional Christianity, so he came up with a rational solution to it. He filled the gaps. That was what Mormonism is all about, is saying, well, what does happen to people who die before they hear the gospel? You know, if baptism is essential, you must be born again of the water and the spirit. How do you fix that? Well, baptism's for the dead, of course, which is mentioned in the Bible. Then all the stuff with creation. But I think the frustration here is that Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, and in the spirit of Freemasonry, which is not a religion, it's actually, as they were experiencing it, was a product of the Enlightenment of the scientific age. Atheistic individuals wrote the Constitution of America. Most of the leading lights were not Christian, but they were Masons. And Freemasonry was all about seeking greater knowledge, understanding things, having an intellectual approach to life. And Joseph Smith, by the King Follett Discourse at the end, talking about how the word for day could be interpreted in the scriptures as meaning eons of time. So he made Mormonism safe for a much longer earth than 6,000 years. He actually taught that by the end. This is a Mormon thing as well as it's only 6,000 years. In fact, the predominant message I got growing up wasn't Joseph Smith clever, because he got over the superstitious Christian thing of the earth being created in 6 actual days. You can attach scientific evolution and the age of the earth to what Joseph Smith taught, because he said he didn't put a time limit on. And this was big, this is you had a lot of the early apostles intellectuals. They gave lectures on these things, the Orson Pratt in Britain, wrote leaf booklets and things offering a rational faith. And it's really tragic that we have a president of the church at the moment who hasn't caught up with any of that or never understood it from the past. He gave an interview a few years ago to a medical department at one of the Utah universities, not the church one, in which he said, and also in an interview with other journalists, that dogs have always been dogs. Man did not evolve from monkeys. Like he said, all the cliche stuff of the ignorance. And he genuinely believes that. And so those are the people in charge of this religion that used to, Brigham Young even said, the purpose of Mormonism is to bring all knowledge in, to send our missionaries out and bring in the knowledge that the chemists have, that the geologists have, that the heathens have, that the sinners have. If it's truth, bring it in, have it. It's part of our religion. Our religion is about including all truth.
I think,
And
Julian,
that is the religion I grew up in.
I
James
think the
Talmage,
nail
who
that
was
you
an
hit on the
influence,
head there, Peter.
my great grandmother. Yeah. Sorry,
So
go on.
so I'm gonna, at risk of sounding like a knob, or more of a knob than normal. I can't remember ever really taking any of it that literally. I thought, long before I kind of stopped
Yeah.
believing in some of the other things, I didn't really, I thought, well, we can easily account for an earth that is billions of years old and still be a believing Mormon. We can, we can believe in dinosaurs. We can even believe in evolution and still make it work. There are ways to do that. And there was a big, I think it was in the 20s, I think it was, there was a big kind of debate amongst the church leadership about evolution. The problem is we've got a prophet.
yeah,
We've got a prophet that speaks to God, receives revelation, and so it should just be easily cleared up, And if it's not that important, because that's what some people would say in argument to what I'm saying here. They would say, "Oh, well, we don't need a revelation on how the world was created. We don't need a revelation on dinosaurs." Well, do you know what? Just give us one, and then we can move on, to the things that we really do need to be thinking about.
yeah.
Let's let's just clear that up. You know, why don't you just, wasn't the prophet just go, yeah, evolution happened, Big Bang happened, you know, move on.
Yeah, I think they're too scared of the fact that science does prove other things. As technology advances, as we make new discoveries, that if they say something very certain at a point in time, which they've done over the years, that they'll be held up to the scientific magnifying glass and shown to be incorrect. And I think just to finish this point, I, much like you, Julian, thought, you know, science, or I at least thought science is just man figuring out some of the ways that God works, and that it can all jibe together, that the earth could still be 4.3 billion years old and Adam and Eve were 6,000 years ago. And then it all started to fall apart for me a little bit when I started reading things from modern day prophets, kind of kiboshing my scientific explanations. But from Joseph Smith in William Clayton's journals notes, the prophet Joseph Smith made the following statement on the 5th of January 1841 during what Clayton called the organization of a school of instruction. He said the earth was organized or formed out of other planets which were broken up and remodeled and made into the one on which we live. And I think that's where kind of we're talking about these seeds of doctrines that then get extrapolated through the cultural milieu of the church and people trying to explain what a dead prophet meant. And I think that's where this comes in, those sorts of statements that then have people saying, oh, well, if it's made from other planets, then the things that we find that are older than 6,000 years are obviously alien villagers or alien like dinosaurs. Because that's the only way that it fits, and it's that cognitive dissonance that gives birth to these extra doctrines.
Okay.
I mean, I had a great gift that when I started at the temple, I think if I remember right, I was 18 and I had this is, you know, old school endowment I was about to experience. And you have a sort of introductory interview with a member of the temple presidency. And the thing, after you like zero prep really of anything to do with the temple, I didn't know what was coming. But the wonderful thing he said was these things are symbolic. These are, you know, effectively these are metaphors. What you're going to see is symbolic of things. And there is language in the endowment that talks about it being symbolic. So I've always been inoculated against the need for any of this to be literal. When I watch Adam and Eve playing things out and having their arguments, I'm seeing an archetype, or, you know, it's men are from Mars, women are from Venus, 1800s version. It's brilliant. Women think holistically. Women, and it's in Genesis, when Eve looks at the fruit, she uses multiple intelligences. She sees that it's beautiful, it's her aesthetic intelligence. She sees that it's nutritious, she has a practical intelligence. She sees that it will give her knowledge and intellectual intelligence. And she holistically kind of puts all those different things together, as we're often told female brains work, and came to a conclusion that she had to take that step. And that is something that the new films, for the short period they lasted, really dragged out and emphasized. They took the same text, but everything about how Eve was thinking and acting and how she interacted with Adam, this was the brilliance of them. It was a tragedy that they got yanked so quickly, was they'd actually radically changed the meaning of all of those conversations. They made Eve not the ditzy fool being tricked by a snake, but she is the thoughtful, intelligent person who's worked it out. He's convinced Adam, who's being a typical male, he's living in a rigid world with boxes of rules. He's going to follow the rules.
We're going to get there,
But
Peter.
it takes women to get him to get, yeah.
We're going to get there.
I think okay, cool. So, but the point I'm making is you can approach all of these things completely differently if someone just gives you permission to see it as metaphorical. But Jane and I, or whoever, are interacting when I mean, she isn't able to get to church much, but we're sort of in this world where we're still plugged into it all. I'm sitting in gospel doctrine lessons and have taught gospel doctrine lessons about it. Well, I'm surrounded by people who are well-respected members of the ward community, who are absolutely buying into the 6,000-year Earth and stuff. And if I even begin to talk about anything scientific, or that maybe there wasn't a global flood, because there definitely wasn't, that wiped out all of humanity 4,000 years ago, they freak out. They worry about my soul and my testimony. I'm the apostate danger. So we've got these worlds going on that are so frustrating, because they worked out the sciencey stuff in the 1800s. We had rational faith, and they're backtracking on it now.
Okay,
And they're not giving it to the kids
Julian.
or the converts in most cases. Yeah.
Julian,
No,
I think
sorry. I was just going to point out that we're an hour and 20 minutes in.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about nudity yet. So
yeah.
where you going with this?
All right, we're about to get there, right?
Signed up.
Yeah.
Right. Ancient Hebrew concepts of the universe, because we're creating this, and the Mormon temple ceremony goes through the ancient Hebrew creation in Genesis. Okay, and it creates this flat Earth kind of model. Okay, and I'm not saying that the temple's flat Earth is. In the video, it used to show a globe Earth, but then it teaches this flat Earth kind of theology. God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Here in this earth, we've got the great deep at the bottom, and we've got a firmament and the waters above the firmament. We've got the lights, the great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also, and God said, let the firmament set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And that's what we've got here. They're set in the firmament. We've got windows of heaven, foundations of heaven. We've got the old ancient Hebrew Sheol, which was the hell. You know, all of these things are very much in the Bible and in the Mormon milieu. But I'm sure a lot of people, if they actually looked at it, you would see that the Genesis creation and the temple creation fits with this. I'm not saying this is correct, but I just think it's interesting to pull out the fact that these things, this physical firmament and these waters above and different things, don't actually scientifically exist in the way that they speak about it. I mean, you could say the hole in the ozone layer may have been a window to heaven, but we got rid of that. So, but moving on to nakedness. Okay, so Adam falls asleep, and they basically say it is not good for man to be alone. They tell all the men in the room to go to sleep, and then what do they say? Elohim, it is not good for man to be alone. Jehovah, it is not good, for we are not alone. Elohim, we will cause a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and make for him a woman to be with him. The male part of the audience are told to close their eyes, at which point I usually fell asleep, to imitate Adam sleeping. While Adam sleeps, Eve enters and stands beside him, and Eve and Adam are naked. Julian.
Okay, can I? Let me get onto the naked bit in a sec. But I just wanted to point out the irony here of what happens, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that are with me on this. So up until this point, we've watched this quite long video in a really dark room with lots and lots of repetition in it. Yeah. And then he gets to this point where he says, all the men will now close their eyes as if they were asleep. Like, as if, you know, half the people in here are asleep. You know, that was always the challenge, wasn't it? You know, you had to be really, really righteously awake.
Yeah.
At that point. But yeah, the nudity in the temple. That's an interesting one, isn't it?
It was always tough for me because I really fancied Eve. The blonde Eve really did it for me, and I felt really bad for having those like feelings.
Oh, I preferred the brunette.
Yeah. I thought that one of the Adams looked, at first when I went, I thought that's Jim Carrey. So yeah, I thought they've really stretched the boat there, haven't they? But yeah, it's nudity in the temple.
Well, the porn shoulders, it's extraordinary. There's pawn
Yeah.
shoulders in the endowment films. It was like, oh, with and very carefully placed foliage and goats and things.
So,
Yeah,
but so
amazing.
if anyone was wondering why we are naked and just covered in bush, then that's why, because this is what you were presented with in the temple endowment. And yeah, if at this juncture anyone who's not subscribed wants to, because we've made a real effort tonight, if you want to like the video and if you want to go on your social media and get everyone over here, this will be, I think, the first time in history that a Mormon podcast has been done in proper cosplay. Because we've really done well tonight. Stick it on your Facebook, get everyone over here and hit the like button. But in the Warsaw Signal on the 15th of April 1846, Emmeline wanted to put everyone straight on the fact that there was no sex in the temple. It wasn't a weird thing. And she says something in here that I think that I'd not heard of before. And again, like Mr. Jarman, it is just a member giving her recounting in a newspaper. So I can't speak to the actual 100%, truthfulness of it. But she says we were conducted into a room called the Garden of Eden. Here we found several of our brethren robed in white also, and apparently in soporific state. So they had the eyes closed and were sleepy. We were presented before them, and a voice from the Lord awoke them from sleep after a considerable ceremony, which I do not recollect much of. There you go, Julian. We were left by the Lord, and soon a very dandy-like fellow appeared with a black cap on and had a long veil attached to it. He appeared very familiar, and that was Satan coming in. But I thought it was interesting. She alludes to the fact that the sisters weren't brought into the room until Eve comes in. And that,
Wow.
there's different accounts everywhere, but I just thought this was an interesting one to bring up, that the women came in and the men were asleep, and they came in at the point that Eve actually comes in, because early on, all of the sisters represented Eve in the ceremony. It wasn't just the one witness couple at the front. So they all came in as Eve. So they may have missed the creation part. Go on, Julian.
Yeah, again, this is, going back to what I've said before, I think this is a really essential point here. The way that it's supposed to be, and when I say the way it's supposed to be, I don't just mean in kind of Mormon theology, but temple ritual generally. It's not, you're not there as the initiate is not there as an observer. You're not there to just sit and watch what's going on. You participate. It is a drama, and you are a participant in that drama. And obviously that's kind of got reduced, more and more, and now he's just, you might as well just almost
Not
sit
be
at
there.
home and just watch it on Netflix. But originally, you were really meant to be involved and part of the whole play.
Yeah, and this bit at the bottom that she puts, I think, is amazing. Okay, she speaks about Satan coming in, and she misses a whole bit about Eve and everything, but she gets to the point where the Lord curses Satan, right? And he said, the Lord pronounced a curse upon him. He gets down on his belly and crawls off. At this point in the holy ceremony, I could not suppress my visible passions, for this fellow acted his part well. Undoubtedly, his part being the part of the devil was the most natural. Poor guy. We were then presented with aprons, and we get to that in a moment, which we put on about this time. A sword was shook at us through the partition of the room, which was to guard the tree of life. Can you imagine someone sticking their arm through
Wow.
with a sword and shaking it? Because in the Masonic ceremony, there's lots of swords. I wish I'd got a sword, and shaking it, and I can hear the kind of crashing of thunder in the back, someone shaking some cans or something, as this sword shakes. So as you say, Julian, it was very much a theatrical thing.
And this whole idea is seen elsewhere as well in other temple rituals, and the idea being that it's kind of symbolic of because let's face it, all religion is about death, isn't it? It's all about overcoming death. That's the real crux of it.
Yeah.
And so the temple is kind of this symbolic journey of overcoming death, and that's what the endowment's all about. And you see the same idea elsewhere, where you've got these kind of people guarding the way, and often armed with swords, or in the Egyptian religion with knives and stuff like that to stop people from getting into the presence of God.
Yeah. Okay, so everyone.
And I just, before you move on, PD, sorry, just
Yeah,
a quickie.
yeah.
There's something there in that old version of the endowment that's amazing. It's where Elohim and Jehovah say, you know, we're going to make a woman for the man so that he's not alone, because we are not alone. That I've never heard that in the endowment. And it's,
Yes.
you know, the thing about the endowment is there is no mention whatsoever anywhere of Heavenly Mother.
No.
But that really, you know, catches my attention, because in a sense that was a reference to Elohim and Jehovah. Is it Jehovah? You know,
Yeah.
having wives. So that, I think that's really significant, that the early versions of the endowment actually referenced Heavenly Mother by implication. I mean, it's all there by implication, I guess.
Yeah.
What the women are sort of going to become as the slave broodmares of their god husbands. But I think that's really, really important. And I'm intrigued about why they took that out by the time of the endowments we were experiencing.
Well, at this point, everyone stands up.
Old chap, really interesting.
Yeah. Well, do you think they say they're not alone because we're together, me and you, Elohim Jehovah? I don't know, but it could be.
But it is about creating a woman as like the destiny for man. You know, man cannot be on their own without a woman. Yeah,
they could have just given him another dude to play ping pong with, but they didn't. He needed a wife.
Well, you can point out that that Adam's parents were two men in this story.
Yeah. Two men created the first man, so why have they got a problem with two men having a kid now?
Yeah. It's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Yeah. I mean, this is the irony, is like the temple endowment has Adam and Steve. It's like, you know, making the stuff, making the people.
Yeah.
PD, can I just get a rewind on this as well? Because I feel like we're moving through some pretty important bits here. I want to go back to the nudity.
Go on.
Because that is a big deal. That is a big deal. You know, I was raised in a very kind of, you know, this real kind of purity culture, you know, where women aren't allowed to show their shoulders, you know. And now suddenly I'm in the temple, and you've got people, these actors that are showing a lot more than just their shoulders. Now, you know, obviously it doesn't show. There are no no boobs in it or anything. You know, it's all very kind of artistically done. You know, but maybe it's just me, but I remember being sat there thinking, well, hang on a sec, how have they done this? You know, because obviously that's not cool. You know, I'm not allowed to, you know, we can't watch R-rated movies. I did anyway, but you're not supposed to. And we you know, this all is a little bit naughty. And yeah, maybe it's just me, but I remember distinctly sitting there watching that and thinking, what's going on here?
Yeah, and
was it just me?
I agree with you. Go on, Laura.
So I was going to say, I have heard other men say this. I don't know whether it was because I wasn't raised the same as you, Julian, that it didn't really stick out as a big deal to see that in the temple. I certainly didn't derail me any more than just being in the temple derailed me. When I saw these shoulders and, you know, more torso than I see generally. But I don't know whether it is a male thing, when males are so kind of, you know, it's shoved down their neck every week to.
Yeah, I was
thoughts, to guard their feelings.
If a shampoo commercial would come on the TV, and it would have a woman in the shower washing her hair with her shoulders out, or would show kind of her silhouette through frosted glass sort of thing. That would be like, shut your eyes, turn away, make sure mum and dad see you turn away, not to look at that, because that's like soft porn, isn't it? According to, them. So then to see this in the temple, it's like, it's whiplash,
No,
isn't
it's
it?
hilarious.
But you've also
Did
got.
you fancy Adam at all, Laura? Did Jennifer Adams get you going?
I think probably Eve more.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you've also got these
That's what
video
Jen was
now
saying.
that it's really quite. I mean, it's even worse now, obviously, because they've pared it down to just photos, haven't they now, or whatever. But it's it's quite boring, and so you kind of look for little bits, And if you go there a lot, you get to know it quite well, and there are these little bits. Like, did anybody else notice how you've got this one scene where in one of the films where Adam's kind of wandering around, kind of loving the Garden of Eden, he's all really, really happy, and then he looks over and he kind of sees like a lion there, and he's like, okay, let's just back away, I'm going to go over in this direction. Did anyone else notice that?
Yeah, the lion sat with a lamb. It was something like
maybe.
that.
I didn't notice whether there was a lamb there, but it was Adam's response that
There was no
always
petting
made
of the
me
lion, was there?
giggle.
Yeah.
But then the other bit that I loved is when in one of the videos where Satan appears and they partake of the fruit, and Satan says to them, "See, you are naked," and Eve kind of looks down like that. Yeah.
You know what?
These little kind of comic moments that you had to kind of find to kind of pass the time.
When I was putting all this together, I did have a thought, and that is that the majority of men will bow to their significant other because one reason is the sexual, attraction, and well, I'm just trying to say Adam won't have had that when he was making his decision, because he didn't know about any of that apparently. So Eve must have made a very well kind of argued decision, even though in the ceremony, as we're about to see, it's very short. It can no other way. But it wasn't, oh, Adam, I'm not gonna put out if you don't eat this fruit.
Are you trying to suggest that is why men capitulate to their wives?
Look, that probably says more about my marriage than anyone else's. So she keeps me on a tight leash. That says a lot too. Oh dear, we're going with this.
We don't need to know that kind of detail, PD.
This is my outfit for later. Right then, in the Garden of Eden. So everyone's moved now. We've moved from the creation room to this lovely Garden of Eden room. I think we've got a picture here. This is these lovely murals again.
Oh, you're going to make me cry again.
Very happy.
Which isn't there anymore.
And we've even got the Masonic symbols up at the top here with the all-seeing eye representing Elohim looking over the garden. We've got something funny going on there. But we've got your lion there, Julian. We've got peacocks in close vicinity. So this really did say that, there was no evil in the Garden of Eden. The lions ate dandelions, and that's why they're called dandelions or whatever. But yeah, it was this paradise that people speak of in Jackson County, Missouri, because there were lions there.
So I've got my flag. This is where we're at in the Garden of Eden in the USA.
In the garden room, Adam and Eve, at one end of the room is an altar, and behind it there is an elevator on which the gods descend. Now, I went to the Salt Lake Temple and did a live session, and I'd got heavy cold at the time, and I'd taken some American cold medicine. So I fell asleep extra quick, but I think I do remember like them coming. I don't think it was an elevator, but it was a stairway or something. and that Elohim and Jehovah appeared on like a balcony, all really like Romeo and Juliet-ish, and then moved down. Okay.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that. I went through the Salt Lake Temple once with the live endowment just before going into the MC Missionary Training Center. I'm so annoyed that he's screwed this all up because I
Yeah.
wanted to go back one day. You know, I was hoping I'd get to experience that again, but it is no more. So I feel very lucky I got to see it at least once.
Yeah. Well,
Mm.
Elohim and Jehovah are both present. Elohim says, addresses Adam. Elohim to Adam, see the garden we have planted for you. Of all the trees of the garden, you may eat, except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This is like indexing, trying to read this. You shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. Now be happy and enjoy yourselves. We go away, but we shall return. Elohim and Jehovah then ascend in the elevator in the sight of the audience. Adam to the audience, now, brethren, calm your minds, because there's a sexy Eve, and be not surprised at anything you shall see or hear. We shall be visited soon. Oh, enters the devil. So, devil arrives.
Can I just comment that there's great banter here? This is pantomime. This is great theatre. You know, again, yeah, there's all these little extras like calm your minds, don't worry, everyone. We're about to have a visitor. One of the sort of epiphanies I had about the endowment is it is hilarious. It's wonderful. It is pantomime. You know, we're used to that art form of theatre in Britain where you break the third wall, you know, where you talk to the audience as Lucifer does and so on. And I think it's just wonderful. I absolutely love the endowment for all sorts of slightly wacky, artsy fartsy reasons.
Yeah.
But isn't that brilliant? You know, we're seeing here the original dialogue was much more conversational. It really was immersive. You don't know what's happening next, and these people come up and introduce themselves, and then they get you into the right mood. You know, this is a brilliant dramatic device. You know, don't worry, everyone, we're about to experience this. And I mean, just wonderful. You know, these are people without television. It must have been amazing, and you really feel you're there in this real world with these real characters.
Yeah.
And
But,
all of that has been sucked out of it as they've made it more and more boring with each iteration.
well,
So I
something
just wanted
that
to big up brilliant
some
drama
some
skills there.
something that we've kind of missed, that is my fault, is that in the creation there were three people involved. There was Elohim, and then there was Jehovah and Michael, the archangel, who did the physical act. And then once they had created it, they wanted to put man on the earth, and they put Michael on the earth as Adam, and his mind was wiped of everything from before. So Adam is Michael, who created the earth along with Jehovah, and this feeds in later to Adam God theory and different things. So I just want to kind of make that point for anyone that's following along the episodes. That is something we'll return to when we get to the veil and different things. But here in the garden, as you say, Peter, there is back and forth, and the devil comes and he says, Adam, you have a nice world here, patterned after the world where we used to live. Now, another point I'd like to make here is the devil could have kiboshed this whole plan by just doing nothing. If he'd have just said nothing, and he obviously knew the plan because he's saying it's patterned after the old world. So if he was really a bad guy, he could have just said nothing and been like, yeah, I'm not getting involved. I've seen what happened last time. I was made to be the bad guy. I'm not getting involved. But he did. And I commented to someone that I could see in like 50 years' time there being a lesson on how the devil is a really bad person, but he fulfills a really important role in the plan of salvation because none of it works without him. There'd be no opposition to right and wrong. And this whole Garden of Eden thing would still just be going on with Adam and Eve trouncing around in Jackson County, Missouri, riding lions naked. So I thought that was an interesting. Anyone? Bueller?
It's an interesting parallel. It's an interesting parallel to debates that Christian philosophers have about Judas Iscariot. You know, that without Judas there is no crucifixion, there's no atonement. You know, so I think there's a real parallel here to the ethical dilemmas you can have trying to
Yeah.
pick this apart a bit. Of Judas had to betray Christ in order for him, you know, therefore shouldn't we be grateful to him?
Okay.
And you know, you've got the whole idea of sympathy for the devil, like he's been set up by God to play this role. Yeah, it opens
Yep.
some really interesting
Julian.
possibilities. Yeah. And I point out that Doug's comment, it is now so boring and bland, is not because I'm talking. He's talking about endowment.
Good.
So, well, I think when he talks about patterned after the old world where we used to live, I think he's just talking about our kind of pre-Earth life. So, you know, the
Yeah.
idea that in our pre-Earth life we lived on a planet. We didn't. So he wouldn't have seen. I mean, I'm talking like this is real. So he wouldn't have seen. A kind of a Garden of Eden scenario and a fall before, because that wouldn't have happened on the planet where we used to live in the pre-existence.
No,
so he wouldn't have seen that. That's my one thought.
Is that then God knowing how we're all going to behave? Because then he would know that the devil will fulfill that role.
Yeah, and that's why really the easiest way to kind of deal with this, other than just say it's nonsense, is to just again stop taking it so literally. You know I mean, stop taking Satan literally.
But it's a literal gospel.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be. One of the things that was a real kind of game changer for me, when I was kind of navigating my way out of the church, was Doctrine and Covenants 19, where God taught, and I'm sorry if you've heard me say this before, I'm sure I'm repeating myself here, but when God's talking about eternal punishment, and he says, well, when I said eternal punishment, I didn't mean it wouldn't have an end. It's my punishment. My name is Eternal. That's another name for me. It's my nickname with my mates. They all call me Eternal. And so eternal punishment just means God's punishment. But I use this language, because I knew that it would make you think, eternal punishment, that's really scary. I better do as I'm told. And so it's a scripture there, a Mormon scripture that kind of says that God isn't beyond using, manipulating us a little bit with language and with symbolism and stuff like that. Yeah. And so if there is a God and there is anything like free will, then God, is somebody that kind of understands human psychology and understands the way to kind of get us to move in the direction that he needs us to move, for our own benefit. And so, it's quite easy for us to just abandon a lot of this stuff, not see it as literal, and so I kind of started to believe in a situation where when I get to heaven, when I die and I meet God and I say, "Oh, Heavenly Father," and He say, "Okay, I'm not actually your father." When I said father, I said it because, that's something that you would understand, that kind of father relationship, and there wasn't, when I said about Satan, there's not really a Satan, but he was just symbolic of kind of human nature and how sometimes, we are drawn towards doing things that maybe aren't beneficial or right or what. Do you know what I mean? It's like you can strip this down a little bit.
But this comes down to personalities as well, isn't it? Because, what I've noticed really now that I've kind of moved away, that actually my personality is quite I'm quite literal about things. So I find it difficult to let go of things that are literal. I find it difficult to not envisage God as, a very old white man with a grey beard and, possibly a cane. He's a lot more like Dumbledore than anything else that I can imagine. I just can't get out of that. And so some of this is personality. And Jay made a really good point there. with no space to discuss this, not even in the celestial room, people are left to their own imaginations and then are not allowed to even really discuss this anywhere. So this is where you get a myriad of ideas, some that are full of imagination and wonder and awe and, you know, and maybe even beneficial and valuable to them, and others that are really, really quite damaging. And that's how you get, as well, fundamentalism is born out of this, because you can see that there is something that is not quite linear in this. There is changes the whole way through. And so why are there changes? And if you've got personalities that say, well, hang on, I want to be as true to and as faithful to God and the original doctrine as I can, you can see how that can happen.
Yeah. And something, yeah. So
Good point, PD.
Something that
Are you
happened
having stupid thoughts?
something I'm just really enjoying having something to twirl because I've not had hair for so long. You know, no, something that happened just
I'm really
before
worried.
this as well.
You're going to get some crazy kind of rash after this.
Oh, I am. It's really itchy. I don't even know
Not
what
just the usual rash, PD.
I've got cream for that. Right. Something that happened just before the devil appeared, and something that's really important. So God has told them not to eat of the fruit of the tree of life. But just before that, when he created Eve, he asks Adam something. And from the current language, it reads, where are we? Right. Why will you call her Eve? Adam, because she is the mother of all living. Elohim. That is right, Adam, because she is the mother of all living. We have organized for you this earth and have planted a garden eastward in Eden. We will place you in the garden, and we will there command you to multiply and replenish the earth, that you may have joy and rejoicing in your posterity. Jehovah introduced Adam and Eve into the garden, which we have prepared for them. And that's important, obviously, because God gives them two conflicting commandments. The first two commandments were a paradox in themselves, because the first, which was not to eat of the tree, and the second, which was to multiply and replenish, they required the knowledge given by eating from the tree. And to not eat from the tree, they would never have the knowledge to be able to multiply and replenish. So God, the trickster God, as we were just talking about, set them up for a catch-22 to start with, you know, and that is where this whole Eve figuring it out first kind of becomes important, because people speak about her being tricked by the devil, and she even says in here, it was the devil who beguiled me. But I think, I don't know, first he goes to Adam and he says here, because Adam says he doesn't remember anything of the world before. He says, oh, your eyes have not yet been opened. And he goes to the tree from which he pretends to pluck fruit, which he offers to Adam. The devil, here, Adam, take some of this fruit of the tree. Adam, I shall not partake. Devil, you won't you? Well, we shall see. Eve, will you take some of this fruit? Eve, who are you? Devil, I am your brother. You, my brother, come to tempt me to disobey my father. Now, this is language from 1906, which we will all recognize as being in the temple today. So some of it hasn't changed, which is interesting. Some of this language has survived over 100 years. And it goes on about disobeying the father. But then the devil says, I said nothing about father. This will open your eyes and you will know good from evil, virtue from vice, etc. And then Eve says, is there no other way? The devil, there is no other way. And she takes of the fruit. So the devil says there, you know, that to be like God, which is the whole point of coming here to this earth, apparently, in the plan of salvation, that this commandment has to be broken. So the whole original sin thing is original, you know, figuring it out rather than a sin and having this kind of silly, ditzy, hair curling woman in the Garden of Eden being beguiled by Satan. She says, is there no other way to gain that knowledge? And there is no other way. So, and the sacrilege that lots
So
of
this is great
Christians.
philosophy.
Well,
Sorry,
sorry,
go on.
Peter. The one line in there, the devil, I am your brother. To most Christians, they find that utter sacrilege that the devil is the brother of us and Jesus, because to them, the devil
But
is
that's
this
ridiculous because he
other
was an
mystical.
angel.
Well,
Yeah, even in the biblical narrative, he used to be an archangel, so they should be that freaked out. That used to annoy me in the Mormon literature, making a big thing of Lucifer is, so I used to read a lot of the anti-Mormon stuff before the internet that was really badly written, and it regularly made a huge thing of these Mormons believe that Lucifer is the brother of Jesus, and they tried to cut out that the temple endowment is all occult Satanism, in thinly veiled disguise, which you could argue a couple of points, but yeah, but I know this is all great philosophy, I mean, this is the what I talked about last time, where the animist religions of the world and the origins of religion in the world is your tribe initiates you into the creation story of your people. You learn the stories, you act them out, you go to a sacred space, you dress up in costume, you become these characters from the dream time. You follow how it is that we have the community we have today. Why do we exist? Why are there men and women? Why are we making families? Why do I need to step up and be responsible? What are the rules of my society? Why are we doing this? What's going on with the planet we're living in, or the environment we're in? And each culture will have its own sort of contribution and answers there. So this is weird as heck compared to, as we said before, compared to our normal sort of Sunday church life. But isn't it wonderful? It's this immersive theatre. It's this it is pantomime. It's hysterical in places. It's so funny, and a lot does depend on how it's acted. And I think one of the lovely things about having the three different films, as that commentary said, that were quite different to each other in how they nuanced up the meaning of phrases and how the acting gave it different contexts and so on. As it was making a really positive point that there are a lot of ways to interpret this. You can have the same wording of the endowment, but you can get very different things from it. And the church is okay with it. We're giving you three different movies here, and they all have a different vibe going on, and you're going to watch them all. And I love that. I think that was a really progressive step to emphasizing that it is for you to decide what these things mean. That's the power of metaphor and symbolism.
Okay. Well,
My current temple president, I think I mentioned before, of the London temple is Dave Irwin, who's at BYU with my parents. So he's a good friend of the family. Just lovely, wonderful guy, and very theatrical. He's a drama expert. Did theatre studies, um, and we had dinner with him, a year or two ago, and had a wonderful conversation. And he was just adamant that no one has any right to tell you what any of this means. That it's for you to go to the temple and reflect on it and just immerse yourself in all these metaphors, and which is brilliant. That's the intellectual religion we've all loved and grown up in. But at the same time, again, I just keep coming to people sitting next to me in gospel doctrine lesson. There are people who've never been introduced to that kind of Mormonism. So they go to the temple and it's all literal. And they're just very simple. They're, not stupid simple, but just they're with simple faith as they've been told to. Their assumption is this is the ultimate truths of the universe, and this is how it all happened, and we're watching it. And no one will come into their life and tell them, "No, you're missing the point. You're meant to find your own truths in this." Sometimes it will cover a bit in a general conference, but I mean, that's the thing with Mormonism. You'll hear the whole spectrum. There have been encouragements to go and get your own knowledge each time, go with the Spirit, see what the Lord's trying to tell you through this story. And it's such a shame that often the people who go the most, the people who are the most diligent and faithful and routine, I must go to the temple, often older people in retirement who got the time for it, are those who are getting absolutely the least out of it. No one's given them permission to go on this personal spiritual quest of playing with these metaphors, seeing new things in them each time. And that, you know, they might get there eventually, but it's not how it's been framed for them. But this is great. You know,
Okay.
I love Mormonism's creation story. It begins with choice. It begins with Eve being a rebel. She breaks the rules. Your exaltation, the plan of salvation involves saying no to God, breaking a commandment, breaking out, seeking knowledge, choosing knowledge over life. Knowledge is worth dying for. And Eve knows this before she makes that choice because it's been explained to her. And that was one of the nuances that really came out more powerfully in the new movies. That she and Adam kind of had this more extended dialogue. They couldn't change the scripts. They did a lot with eyebrows and body language and everything, but they flipped the script totally to them both contemplating that there is a bigger thing here, but it's going to be painful. Their emotion, they understand they're about to sacrifice Eden for something better, but it's going to be painful, but they will face it together. I mean, that is how awesome the endowment could be. And it
Okay.
can, if you've been to give them permission to think of it that way, but they've had to kill it.
Okay.
And it's being dumbed down and dumbed down. It's such a tragedy. Yeah.
All right. We're going to fast forward because we're getting to the end of this section, getting towards the climax of this. And here we go. Satan with his aprons, he's come in, he's beguiled Eve as such. She says she'll partake. And then we have the first domestic on earth as Adam and Eve argue with one another because Eve then takes the fruit to Adam. Adam, here is some of the fruit of that tree. It is delicious and is delicious to taste and very desirable. Adam, Eve, do you not know what fruit that is? Eve, yes, it is a fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Adam, I cannot partake. And then she says, this is the original sister laying it down. Adam, do you intend to obey all of Father's commandments? And she's figured it out. She knows that you can't do both now. Adam, yes, all of them. Eve, do you not... Oh, pardon me. 300 likes. Do you not remember that Father commanded us to multiply and replenish the earth? I have partaken of this fruit, and by so doing shall be cast out, and you will be left a lone man in the Garden of Eden. Adam, Eve, I see that this must be, and I will partake that man may be. And then Lucifer, after Adam eats of the fruit, he walks to the side of Adam with a look of approval and says, that is right. And then Eve sets it out. It is better for us to pass through sorrow that we may know good from evil. And they speak to Lucifer, saying that they knew him from the beginning, and they get on to Lucifer's apron and they say to him, what is that apron you have on? Now at the top here on the screen you can see some depictions of the old style aprons. The one with the fig leaves is the green apron that Adam and Eve will soon wear to cover their nakedness, and the one on the right is the devil's apron, which is usually navy blue or black. And interesting that he has one, and that it's very much a thing in masonry, as we're about to see. And he says it is, at least at this point, it is an emblem of my power and priesthood. But it doesn't say this anymore. In the current version of the temple ceremony, Satan doesn't have an apron. So
Ooh.
written by, let me just pull this up because I forgot to put it in, but I think it's very worth sharing. It is from Utah Lighthouse Ministry again. It is this, excuse the pictures there. The Salt Lake City Messenger issue 132, and it says Lucifer's apron. In the 1984 version of the temple drama, after Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit, Lucifer came on the scene and Adam asked, "What is that apron you have on?" To which Lucifer responded, "Is an emblem of my power and priesthood." The dialogue continues. Adam, priesthoods? Lucifer, yes, priesthoods. This exchange was shortened in 1990 and then totally deleted in 2019. Lucifer's apron is visible in the 2013 clandestine video of the live enactment of the ritual. Lucifer's apron appears to be green in the video, but has usually been described as black or navy blue. We're not informed as to the visibility of his apron in today's live session. In the recent videos, it has been hard to see his apron. But these are just the latest edits to Lucifer's role in the ritual. In the 1984 version, after Adam and Eve left the garden and entered the lone and dreary world, Lucifer introduced them to a preacher, and we'll get to that in the next, I guess, episode. Oh, I didn't show it you on the screen, did I? That's what it looks like.
Is this kind of phasing out the idea that, because didn't you used to have a Catholic priest in it? Haven't we covered that way? You used to have a Catholic priest.
That comes in the next room, in the Earth room, and it used to be many different Christian preachers, and then it wasn't until like the early 20th century that they changed it to a Catholic, just a single priest.
So is this part
or generic
of
Anglican? Yeah.
the phasing out of emphasizing the fact that there are false priesthoods hanging around?
Possibly. It does raise a question, doesn't it, about what are those priesthoods? And I don't know anywhere else where it speaks about what those priesthoods might be. So
I think they're just trying to get rid of something that is very, very Masonic.
yeah.
The whole apron thing is very Masonic, and him having his own Masonic apron, like the fig leaves thing.
Specific symbols on the early Lucifer aprons.
You can get away with the fig leaves bit because that's to cover their nakedness, and it does talk about that in the Bible. But the idea of Satan having an apron, symbolic of his power and priesthood, that's very Masonic.
Yeah. And Adam and Eve now receive their aprons. Now, this is always really, I find this funny, right? So from up in the heavens, or out of the room, I guess, if it's a live thing, you hear Elohim's voice. Jehovah, we promised Adam and Eve that we would visit them and give them further instruction. Let us go down. And it's like naughty school children. Jehovah, we will go down, Elohim. Adam, I hear their voices. They're coming. And they start running to hide their nakedness. Lucifer, see, you are naked. Take some fig leaves that you may make aprons. Father will see your nakedness. Quick, hide. Come, let us hide. And then the narrator tells everyone, pop your green aprons on to hide your nakedness. And then at this point, there's a whole conflab with God, and he's kicking them out of the garden. And that's where we will pick up the next episode, when they get kicked out. Julian?
Yeah, can I just share with you a little illustration of how weird I am?
Go on, mate.
If anyone was wondering. So this is so daft, but when I was kind of firmly in the church, and
I think you've mentioned this, haven't you?
oh, have I?
Say it, maybe not.
I'm always repeating myself. Just that when I was regularly attending the temple and trying to extract as much meaning from it as I possibly could.
Say, we know you've been married for years. He's given no clue whatsoever about what he's about to talk about, but you've already guessed what it is. That's a married couple right there.
Come on.
He hasn't said a word that identifies which story this is.
So
See the danger coming.
it kind of occurred to me. I had this thought that everything that we wear in the temple is white, except for the apron. The apron is the only thing that isn't white. But it's also Satan that tells us to put on the apron, not God. It's Satan that says to put on the apron.
Okay.
And so I had this idea that if I, at that point in the endowment, if I decided not to put on the apron, then the officiator, there would be a knowing look at the officiator, and he'd be like, he'd stop the whole endowment and say, "Brother, come with me," and I would be taken then and kind of made
Beaten.
profit. No, they'd make me profit because
They'd be like-
I've understood the real meaning of this. I'm not just following the instructions of Satan. I am staying true to whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let it go to
well,
Rome, but
It's weird. That thought did
That's a good point.
did cross my mind.
For what it's worth, I would have liked someone to have done that at least.
yeah, at least tried. Okay, so we've got one more thing to look at, and that is the first token, because we get that before we move on. But before we do, before we end, we want to get to 300 likes over the next week on this video. So please give it a like, please share it, and subscribe to support the channel. Okay, so the first token, and we have agreed that a red line for us is disclosing the actual wording and the signs. We're not going to do that. So, and it's very blurry. So, yeah. But I think the beginning bit is okay, because it's just the legalistic bit at the beginning. It doesn't say anything about the signs and tokens and different things, right? We and each of us solemnly bind ourselves that we will not reveal any of the secrets of the first token with its company name and sign or penalty, because there were penalties at this point in 1906. Should I do so? I agree that, and then it gives the penalty. Now, that wording, apart from the penalty, still pretty much survives today for each of them. And that's why we're not going to give them, not because we, I guess, believe, some of us might. I don't believe that I'm bound by any sacred oath not to give it. But as we discussed earlier, and Julian was discussing with the name, it will make some people uncomfortable going through that. So we won't. But what we will look at is Freemasonry in 1820 and what they used to do. And then for those in the know, you can pick out the bones of that. So the guard or sign of the entered apprentice. And he's bringing his hands into different positions. And then the master then draws his right hand across his throat, the hand open, the thumb next to the throat, and drops it down by his side. And the oath, I do hereby solemnly swear that I will never reveal what I am about to receive, binding myself under no less penalty than to have my throat cut across and my tongue torn out by the root. So that's a penalty that the Masons had for this first entrant level.
PD, did you want to show us something at the same time?
Oh, you know what? You'd have thought I'd done this before. Okay.
I wasn't sure whether you were going to purposely not show it. So I didn't
no. I'm looking. For anyone who wants to, it's all on the internet. Okay. I'm just not going to be the one that speaks it. So on the right here, the Freemasonry from 1820s. This is taken from the Utah Lighthouse Ministry document that I've taken a few things from, and them comparing things. So this is their comparison with the first token that you get in the temple, and this is the entered apprentice, so the beginning of being a Mason. So they take this oath about cutting their throat and different things, which does jibe with some other things that we're talking about. And then the master and the candidate holding each other by the grip of the entered apprentice. The master says, "What is this?" Answer, "A grip." The master, "A grip of what?" And then the answer, "The grip of the entered apprentice Mason." The master, "Has it a name?" It has. "Will you give it to me?" "I did not so receive it, neither can so I impart it." So people will know that there's a lot of symbology there going backwards and forwards, okay, without going into what happens in the Mormon temple. What we've got there from the masonry is strikingly similar to some things that people will have looked at. And the entered apprentice is given an apron of white lambskin, an emblem of innocence. I just thought that was interesting. Julian?
I think it's worth pointing out that a lot of the people that would have been given the first endowments by Joseph Smith were Masons as well. So this, this wouldn't have been a surprise to them that there are similarities, and I think the kind of the rhetoric that they used was that Joseph was restoring the true kind of secrets of Masonry, and that's how they would have. That's how they would have kind of associated it in their minds. But this idea of these tokens, these tokens in Masonry are used to identify different Masons, and there's lots of if you're interested in this kind of thing, then just search the internet. There's lots of things about people using Masonic handshakes to kind of gain advantage in the world, and that's one of the things that kind of brings about so much suspicion about Masonry, this secret society, where if you're stopped by the police and you give them the right kind of handshake, then you'll get let off, and that kind of thing. I'm sure we've all heard it, and I'm sure there is truth in it. But it causes me to wonder. So we don't, these tokens that we're given, that we receive in the temple, we are not instructed to use them in any setting other than the temple. What's interesting is that we do have Doctrine and Covenants. I can't remember the section where it talks about using a handshake to identify an angel. So there is, that maybe is kind of inferring this kind of thing within the temple endowment, as we'll look at later on. We've got Adam using these tokens to kind of identify true messengers of God and stuff like that.
And we've got Joseph potentially doing a cry from the window when
That's what I was thinking.
To identify himself. So
there's
potential that people did identify themselves that way.
Yeah, he recognised obviously that that there were Masons in the mob, and thought that might help him. But I just wondered whether this endowment was given to people before they went out off and served their missions. Masonry was born in Europe, so these people are going out off to serve missions in Europe. And I wonder whether there was some kind of idea that if they knew these tokens, the idea being that they actually would use these to kind of introduce themselves, because these tokens, certainly the first token can be done kind of easily without it being obvious what you're doing, if that makes sense. So they could actually, as they're meeting people in Europe, they could use this token. And if this person was a Mason, then it would gain them certain advantages, possibly.
Yeah.
You've been given that by somebody I know.
Me, yeah.
Somebody, like a work colleague, has done that with you, haven't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think the whole club, I'd like to be a Freemason, but I can't afford it, because I don't think I could get into paying that much money again to be part of a club that kind of does all this role playing stuff. I think it'd be too triggering. And I don't want to spend money to be triggered like that. But I do think as kind of a community, and the benefits through knowing people, it's a bit like church, isn't it? A lawyer or a doctor, whereas in your normal community you probably don't know all those people. And Masonry is the same. All those people, and there's those connections in every town that you go to, which is why maybe for missionaries it was good, because they could stay at the lodges and find sustenance. But my plants are wilting, so that means it is time to end. Thank you guys for all of your input, for your passion, and for just making the show what it is. Thanks for everyone in the chat. We've had a really lively chat, and I think people have been in and out and enjoyed it. Please like the show and share it with your friends if you feel comfortable enough to share naked English people in bushes with them. The next one, we will be out of our Garden of Eden garb and into our celestial world animal skins. Let's see what we can come up with for that in a couple of weeks' time.
Okay.
The call has gone out, but for now, thank you so much, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks, guys. See ya.